And we're starting in South Carolina is because they get the big primary on Saturday. And
we head there tomorrow.
Yeah, that's right.
And Donald Trump was there last night with our own Laura Ingraham, and she was pressing him on what he's going to do in the new administration, but she wanted his reaction on the latest, on the massive price tag he's going to have to pay. This is what the former president had to say. Watch.
It is a form of Navalny. It is a form of communism or fascism. The guy's a nut job. I've known this for a long time, and I've said it openly. No jury, no anything. Letitia James is horrible attorney general in New York, campaigned on I will get Trump, I will get Trump. We went through a trial. It turned out we're totally innocent on everything, and he fined me $355 million plus interest and other things. If I didn't run, I wouldn't have any of these lawsuits. You know that. None of them. They would have gone on to the next. And look, Nikki has no chance, but if she ever did, they would go after her the same way. These are vicious people. These are vicious, sick people. They're sick. I don't care about the revenge thing. I know they usually use the word revenge. Will there be revenge? My revenge will be success.
You know, it is interesting that he makes the case that no matter if it's me or Nikki Haley, that they would be going after a Republican. And you just got to look at all these images of all these politicians as well as these celebrities that have photos with Donald Trump, the Trump brand. Everybody wanted to be in Trump Tower, wanted to be on the Celebrity Apprentice, wanted him at their wedding. They attended his wedding. But the moment he decided to get involved in politics is when you saw the criminal justice system change a little bit, the news anchors change a little bit, and he's saying, no matter if it's me or Nikki Haley, they're just going to go after a Republican.
Well, Nikki Haley was top of mind because she had that big speech yesterday down at Clemson, I believe, in South Carolina. And her message was not what Donald Trump wanted to hear. She said she essentially is looking forward to competing in South Carolina, her home state, this weekend, but she's looking ahead towards Super Tuesday when 20 states vote. She said, I mean, this isn't Russia. We don't want someone to go in and just get 99% of the vote. She also said she would not kiss the ring of Donald Trump. So, you know, she's taking him full on. And this weekend, they're going to have a battle.
Yeah,
they're going to do battle.
The Real Clear Politics, which is an average of all the polls, shows Trump at 61.8% in South Carolina and Nikki Haley at 36.5%. I thought something that was interesting last night, if you watched the town hall with Laura, Donald Trump was talking about how much he has to pay. It's basically $450 million when you include interest, which is an exorbitant amount. And he said, if you look at the 8th Amendment, this shouldn't be possible. He says, that says excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed or cruel and unusual punishment inflicted. Right. And then he said last night, and we've aired this clip a lot this morning, my revenge will be my success.
Well, in the success over not just getting reelected, but also to push back on those that he believes are politically attacking him, like New York's Attorney General Letitia James. And Lawrence, you mentioned Trump Tower. Can you imagine the image if Letitia James actually forces Trump Tower to be sold for pennies?
Well, she's ready.
She said it last night.
If he does not have funds to pay off the judgment, then we will seek, judgment enforcement mechanisms in court, and we will ask the judge to seize his assets. Financial frauds are not victimless crimes. He engaged in this massive amount of fraud, and it wasn't just a simple mistake, a slight oversight. The variations were wildly exaggerated, and the extent of the fraud was staggering. Last I checked, tourism is up, and Wall Street is doing just fine.
Well, she can want to liquidate places like Trump Tower and Park Avenue and Avenue of the Americas as well. And there's plenty of Trump properties here in New York. But that doesn't mean he's not going to appeal, because last night he said he was asked by Laura if he's made a decision about paying the money, which is a lot. Even if he appeals it, he's going to have to pay a lot to put up all the money. He said, quote, we'll have a lot of cash, but that doesn't mean he can take it. Well, so it sounds like he is 100% going to appeal this. as long as he can.
Well, also, Steve, she said in that interview, which we only see her doing interviews if she's going after Donald Trump. She's not doing interviews with the migrants that are here illegally, that are bashing our cops against the head with chairs in the shelters. No comment about the violent crime that's happening in our city. But in that exchange, she says that there's a victim. But then she never tells us who the victim is. And I think that's what a lot of people in the business community is saying. If there was a victim, it would be the banks. But the banks are saying he paid it back on time.
Yeah.
Actually, he did it early, and we want to give him more money.
Jonathan Hurley said the same thing. He said, I asked him, is this fraud? And he said, Donald Trump made money, but the banks made money. He paid them back. You know, there's interest that these banks charge you when you borrow money from them. He paid everything. They made money as well. He talked about different things last night, including whether or not he would debate Joe Biden. And he said, oh, yeah, I'll debate him right now. And then he talked about Hunter and he talked about the border. He also talked about Biden's mental acuity and his vice president shortlist. Listen.
He's declined, and there's no question about it, but he was always sort of semi-declined if you go back 25 years. No, but he was not one of the smarter people. He's tried to be president many times, 4 times at least that they know of. And all of a sudden, when he's most diminished, this is when he hit, and he did it. If I felt diminished or declined anyway, I think I'd know it. And I think I'd say, I'm not running. Somebody should talk to him.
Will you challenge him to regular debates?
I'll do it right now on your show. I'll challenge him right now. I don't think he's going to debate, though. I really don't think so. They said, look, he's incompetent to go to court, but he can be president. Figure that one.
What qualities are you looking for in your vice presidential pick?
Well, always the first quality has to be somebody that you think will be a good president, because if something should happen, you have to have somebody that's going to be a great president. A lot of people are talking about that gentleman right over there in a very positive way, Tim Scott. He has been much better for me than he was for himself. I watched his campaign, and he doesn't like talking about himself, but boy, does he talk about Trump.
The audience has been asked who they think would be a good choice, and various names came up. One of them was, of course, Vivek Ramaswamy. Yeah. He's made a big splash. Ron DeSantis, who's making an appearance today in South Carolina, we just found out. Obviously, Tim Scott, Byron Donalds, and a big presence here for Tulsi Gabbard. Very interesting. And Kristi Noem as well, I should say. Right. Are they all on your short list?
They are. So, and there's essentially what Laura was just talking about. You know, it's interesting, and he would hate to reveal his cards too early because it's essentially a tease. You know, who would I make as my vice presidential nominee? But going back to what he said earlier, and he challenged Joe Biden to debate him, but he also said, I don't think Joe Biden's going to do it. And I think the reason, and we detailed this earlier, I think the reason is because Joe Biden would say, look, Donald Trump did not take part in the debates during the Republican primary. Why should I debate him now?
But look at what you have in that same highlight reel we just played. You have Trump talking about Biden's mental acuity and obvious apparent decline, that the whole country, this isn't just a political attack. Right. The entire country, regardless of your politics, is seeing a man in decline. So if you choose not to debate Trump, if you're Joe Biden, you are essentially conceding the point that you're not able to take that stage.
It's the big issue.
What message does that send to Democrat voters?
Think about it this way. If the two of them are on a screen, you know, as we saw last night, Donald Trump has got a lot of energy. As we saw this morning, Joe Biden struggling to get up the stairs on Air Force One, the short stairs. He does not have a lot of energy. You got to figure that the Biden campaign in Wilmington's going, you know, do we really want that split screen? Because that would just feed into the narrative that he's too old.
But it goes to the question, why is he dodging Donald Trump? Can he not do a debate? And I think to the argument of, you know, the Republicans, Donald Trump didn't show up to the Republican debate. So did Joe Biden. He blocked the debate because there is a Democratic primary going on right now. He would not allow the debates to happen. They have muddled with the system there. So I don't think that argument is going to hold weight. And as Donald Trump said, and I thought it was a valid point yesterday, there's a difference between a primary and a general election. Yeah,
Biden, his team will not allow him to debate Donald Trump. They're too scared to let him get up there because they're worried about the gaffes. And also, they might argue, we're not going to put them up to debate because you already know where they stand. They've both been president. But the issues have changed. We've seen Ukraine being invaded. We've seen Israel being invaded. Taiwan is worried. We've seen open borders. So much has changed since they ran 3 years ago.
I'm Steve Ducey.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.